In this video, we are going to look at learning and memory and what the information processing theory says about how we learn as humans. This will be the first of two videos where learning and memory are discussed. Think about the following questions. When we need to remember something, how do you remember? When you go to the movies, how do you remember when you've parked your car? What about when you're rushing through the door in the morning and you need to find your keys? How do you know where they are? Or when you come to a new environment like your college, you're being introduced to a whole lot of new people. How do you remember their names? How does our memory work? Before we jump into the latest and greatest model of our memory, let's look at this following cartoon. What does the human brain mean compared to here? That's right, a computer. The best model that we have today to explain how our memory works is the information processing system. You'll also hear this, I'll be referring to the information processing model, or like the title of our unit, the information processing theory. This model, the mind very much compared to a computer. Think about the times in the past you've studied all hours, you've put in the anxiety, the sweat, the tears, only to forget the following semester or even the following day. What does our brain work like? Like a computer. Think about what it is said in the chapter that you have read. For example, if we don't file our information well, we are not going to be able to find it. If we have too many things going on, the system will crash. So, of course, the joke is about the human mind being compared to a computer, and in a lot of ways, that's what it really is. We do file things in our memory. How we file them, meaning how well they are organized with the information that we previously learned, will determine how well and quickly we are able to bring up the information when we need it. This cartoon really illustrates what we are going to be focusing on today: human memory and the information processing system. Let's take a closer look at the information processing theory. This is the theory that will be the foundation of everything we learned in this class today. According to the theory, there are three main components to the information processing system. There are short-term memory, working memory, and the long-term memory. Let's look closer at these three components. The first component is the information processing model, is the short-term memory sensory store. This is also referred to a sensory memory or sensory register. This component is where all the information first enters our mind. All the sensory information that we are receiving from our environment. So what kind of input that comes in? Think about your senses. Go back to your kindergarten. How many senses do you have? 5, right? Unfortunately, that's not correct. Depending on the theories that you speak to, there can be anywhere from 10 to upwards of 20 different senses. We all know the basic 5: sight, hearing, smell, touch. So when you think about the information that's coming through the basic 5 senses, what are you seeing right now? What are you sitting? Are you inside? Are you outside? Are you in your room or your library? Are these things on your desk? Do you have the books, paper spread out, or it is just your computer in front of you? What are you hearing? Is it your roommate playing music? Is it your phone going off? Are there people in the library who are talking? Or do you have music of your own in the background? What do you smell? Is someone eating pizza near you? Touch. How does the chair feel? What can you actually take in the sense of touch and break it down into a few different parts? We can feel things that are hot, things that are cold. We feel pressure, we feel pain. We also have a sense of motion. Are you possibly listening to this while driving a car or walking across in your campus? We also have a vestibular sense or a sense of balance. Let's know that we are right side sitting up and not falling down. What happens to this information in the short-term memory storage? One of the two things that can occur, it can either move in the working memory or get lost forever. This component is often referred to as store or a register because it is not a technically memory. The information moves through the short-term memory store so quickly, though it does not even register our conscience. In fact, if the information does not move into a working memory in half a second to 3 seconds, it gets lost forever. Think about the last time you were walking through the campus and all of the people, the buildings, the object, the flags, the scenery, the plants, the trees, the memory, even the birds are people on bikes that you were encountering. All of the conversation that you heard, people were either talking loudly, whispering, or maybe someone was singing, or you were hearing music of your own. All these things were coming in through your short-term sensory store. Most of the things that were lost very quickly, although they did register for a brief flash in the information processing model. Although most of the information that comes through the short-term sensory store is lost, some information does get pushed into the working memory. How does this occur? Think about the things that you were consciously thinking about, as if you were walking through the campus. Maybe you were listening to music of your own, or you're having a conversation with a friend. These things did enter your working memory, but how did they get there? Let's look at the next slide. Now pay attention. Literally, we need to pay attention in order to move things from one short-term memory sensory storage to our long-term memory. Would you like an example of this? Let's look back at the little stroll across the campus. You saw a lot of people, a lot of things that you were walking, but all didn't catch your attention. Maybe somebody was walking wearing the same t-shirt that you wear, or someone you met in a previously welcome event meet. This has probably caught your attention and brought you information into your working memory, which is really our consciousness. What were we studying? However, we need to read a sentence or a paragraph or a whole page. At the bottom of the page, you have no idea. You have no idea what you just read. It's a working memory issue. What is happening is that you weren't paying attention. So everything that was coming out of your short-term store, but because you might have been thinking about something else, maybe a conversation that you were just having, or listening to music, or thinking about how you don't like the song that is playing, because you were attending to other information, the information that you were reading in the book wasn't coming into your working memory and being processed. What does that say about working memory? What is happening then? Well, these are three things that can happen. First, we don't think it's an important issue, or if something else more important comes in and pushes that information and out, the memory will be lost. Second, if we rehearse and repeat the information, such as maybe an email address you've received, anywhere to write down, or if you repeat the information over and over, it will stay in our working memory for a bit longer than normal. Third, it can occur is the information can go into our long-term memory. Moving information into a long-term memory, however, learning actually occurs. This is the information that we've been able to retrieve at a later time. Repeating information such as an email address that we have just received is probably not going into our long-term memory. We are going to have to repeat it until we can write it down or to put into our phone or computer, because moving information into our long-term memory is really the gold standard of memory. It is the holy grail. This is where we want our memories to go when things are important, such as studying for a class or remembering someone's birthday. But how do we get information into a long-term memory? We'll get to that in a bit. But let's take a little bit closer look at our working memory. Our working memory is our consciousness. We attend to information, we think about it on a conscious level. Unfortunately, there is not that big of a capacity in our working memory. We can really only think about 5 to 9 different things at a time. And actually, experts nowadays think that it's a lot lower, probably closer to 4. So what this means is that our working memory has a very small capacity, but on top of having a small capacity, it has a very short duration. The duration of our working memory is 5 to 15 seconds. That means if the information is attended to and brought into a working memory, but something else doesn't occur, such as a rehearsal, moving the information into a long-term memory, the information will be lost. So think about the email address that you were trying to remember, but you didn't have anywhere to write it down. You can rehearse this and keep it into your working memory for a little bit longer than 5 to 15 seconds, because our working memory has a very small capacity. You want to make sure someone doesn't come by and start talking to you while you are trying to remember that email address. If, for example, that happens, someone comes by and asks you a question, asks you what time it is, or tries a conversation with you, when what happens is the capacity is so small for our working memory, the new information coming in will actually push the email address that you're trying to remember, and again the memory will be lost. So looking back into our capacity for our working memory, 7 plus or 2 minus or 5 9, it is the four things that we can hold in our memory at one time. It is a kind of information illusion that gives multitasking really. We can do maybe pay attention to maybe 4 things, 5 things, or 9 things at one time and be great multitasker. This is a very common belief. It is not actually true. What our brains do as opposed to multitasking is really task switching. We can switch our focus from one thing to another, and we can hold things in our working memory for a limited amount of time. But we don't necessarily pay attention to more than one thing at a time. We move very quickly from focusing and paying attention to one thing as opposed to another. So what does this look when we are studying? Let's pretend that we have been studying for a few hours and we put in a lot of effort. But in the background, we have our music on and our focus, our deep concentration, you're reading, you're bringing information into your working memory, not just your short-term sensory. You're paying attention to that information that you're reading. You're going to review your notes, but a song comes on and you've heard the song already 3 times today and you don't feel like listening to it again. And so temporarily you put down your working memory away and your consciousness away from studying and change the song. Or maybe a song that you really like comes on and you start to sing the lyrics or hum the tune, or you just turn up the volume and very briefly your working memory switches from multitasking to studying music. What's the big deal? It's only a few seconds, right? We went right back to where we were, but unfortunately that is not true. When you go back to your work, when you go back to your notes, when you go back to your book, what happens is that you have to figure out where you left off. This task switching, although is very rapid, ultimately fatigues. Our executive control system is an important to our working memory. The executive control system is one of the 3 components of the working memory and is very important to what we learn. We process things consciously and make meaning out of the information that we attend to. The executive control system organizes information and makes inferences in order to make the new information meaningful. This system also decides what information to attend to. It decides what is important to us, what is not we need to rehearse and keep for a little bit longer, and what is important at all. And that is even it catches our attention briefly. We need to let go of memory loss and don't process it any further. It also decides what information is going to get sent to long-term memory because it deems it important that we need to retrieve it at a later time. The executive system is a very important component to working memory and especially important in learning. But again, it can be easily be fatigued, and there are several things that are vying attention and competing for the short-term duration and the small capacity of our long-term memory. This piece of information is the executive control system. It is really important to us as learners. It means that we need to maximize our working memory and limit our number of distractions. For example, if you are trying to study for an exam, if you are writing a paper, preparing for a presentation or a classroom discussion, we need to make sure there are not other things that we are fighting for our attention as we are trying to learn and make sense of the information that is coming in. So this means we are going to do the hard stuff, shut down our phones. So we are not going to constantly email pings or messages, studying in the library where there are less distraction, less noise, less friends coming by, knocking on our door, wanting to hang out, shutting off our music, having music that doesn't have lyrics because language is complicated, and pull out our attention and trying to learn. By maximizing the ability of our working memory, we'll be better able to ensure the information that we are trying to process, learn, is attended to and processed. Meaningfully, it is organized so that we can retrieve it in our long-term memory and it will be available to us. Speaking of the long-term memory, it takes a look at the long-term memory, the promised land, the gold standard of memory. When learning occurs, this is where we want the information that we are trying to learn to end up. But in order to it to be useful to us, we need to be able to bring it back into our working memory where we need it. Either on a test or a classroom discussion when we are presenting, So how do we ensure that we need to do is to encode the information by making sense of it. Based on what we know, our personal experiences, previous knowledge, we need to organize information, which means we need to associate it with other information that we already know. It will help lead us to new information that we are learning. We need to encode it as opposed to just depositing it in the long-term memory. A good example of a good metaphor that we think about: when you were a kid, you were really wanting to play outside, you wanted to clean your room from outside. What did you do? Probably like most kids, you took everything and threw it under your bed and stuffed it in your closet. Now that's great because you get to run outside and play your task while finishing. Unfortunately, when you had to go back and find your toys, maybe you wanted to play with your GI Joe or Barbie or whatnot. So you have no idea where it was. You need to probably check under your bed, your closet. But to find the toy, you would probably have to take everything out of the closet, put everything out from under your bed in order to find what you're looking for. Now think about this. If you're studying information and you're cramming everything in, if you're studying information and instead of taking time and organizing it and making sense of it based on your previous knowledge, what will happen is that the information will just get stuffed into your long-term memory, like the toys keep getting stuff in your closet. And this means that the information is just being deposited. What happens the next day is when you are present in your presentation and taking the test, is that you're not going to be able to retrieve the information. You're not going to be able to put the information from your long-term memory and put it into your working memory so you can write it down or articulate it. That's where the problem lies. We are going to study for hours, or we are studying the whole day before the test, but we can't seem to remember what we studied. One of the things that occurred either is the information got crammed and stored into a long-term memory and we were not able to retrieve it, or it never got put into the long-term memory at all, and the memory was just lost. It stayed in our working memory because we are repeating it, trying to memorize it, but instead of going into a long-term memory, it simply got lost, we stopped thinking about it. So this begs the question, did we really forget what we learned, or did we not learn in the first place? How do we maximize our working memory and ultimately support our long-term memory from being able to encode and retrieve information effectively? Well, we have to make sense of it. We have to organize it for ourselves, and we have to take the burden off our working memory trying to remember a lot of unnecessary things. So we see here, we have a matrix, we have a representation or a graphic organization that will help you remember the things that you went over. It is a comparison of the three main components of the information processing system: the short-term memory store, the working memory, the long-term memory, and we are comparing the capacity and the duration of these three components. So we have taken a lot of information that we have over the previous 3 slides and brought it all onto one slide so that we can compare and contrast and make sense of it. So the relationship between the 3 components and the capacity and duration of each varies. A few final questions to help you reflect on what you have learned in this lecture. So what are you choosing to pay attention to? Are you maximizing your working memory capacity? What is your environment? Is it distracting you?